Can you hear me okay, Karthik?
I can hear you. Hey, buddy.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
Great.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Okay, what am I seeing here? Well, I may have to log out. I'm getting let's see what's happening here. So, yeah.
What do
Okay,
you see? Do you see us?
I'm not sure. All right. Okay, I'm going to log out and log in again. What's happening here? I'm getting okay. Okay, I think.
Hello, all.
Okay.
Hello, all. Can folks hear me?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. Welcome. Hello, buddy, Zach, Heather, Neha, Ashton, and Kelly, and Charlie. Welcome, everyone. I think we might have a few other, and Emily as well. I think we might have a few others that trickle in, but I think we can go ahead and get started. So welcome to the September meeting of the Multimodal Accessibility Advisory Council. We are a body that's appointed by the mayor that's focused on building. We're a body that's appointed by the mayor that's focused on helping DC become less hostile to people with disabilities in terms of mobility. So very excited to have folks here join us in that quest. So what I'd like to do today is first start off with introductions. We can just do a quick round of introductions. If you can just say kind of your name, if you're with an agency and or other organization, and then just pass it on to another person. Then we'll hear from the Chief Equity Officer's office about the Automated Traffic Enforcement Task Force, and specifically some questions that we had asked or kind of we had brought up around making sure that the most dangerous drivers are being taken off the road, or vehicles being taken away from the most dangerous drivers. And then lastly, we will do a deep dive into a scorecard or kind of report card that we've been working on in the past few meetings, and would love to get folks their opinions and thoughts and questions before we finalize that. So why don't we go ahead and get started? I'll introduce myself first. I'm Karthik Balasubramanian. I'm the chair of the MAAC, the Multimodal Accessibility Advisory Council. I'm also a professor at Howard University in the Information Systems Department, and just very interested in helping. And I also have an eye condition called macular degeneration, and just very interested in making sure that that folks with disabilities like us can get around the district safely. So I'll pass it to Buddy Moore, another MAAC member.
Yes, thank Karthik. Buddy Moore, member of the MAAC, also the outreach coordinator for the Bernice Fontenot Senior Wellness Center in Ward 1, and also a volunteer with the Prevention of Blindness Society. I also have a vision issue. I have glaucoma, which has taken away all of the vision from the left eye, and it's affecting my right eye somewhat. So I'm working on trying to keep my right eye as healthy as possible. So here I am trying to make sure that the MAAC is in fact attempting to develop some things that will help people who have disabilities such as mine. And I'd like to pass it on to Heather.
Thank you, Buddy.
Sure.
Heather Foote from the Pedestrian Advisory Council, and the sister to MAAC and BAC, and the PAC, Pedestrian Advisory Council, is looking forward to having Emily and Charlie at our October 23rd meeting. Thank you. Let's see. Kai Hall, I don't.
Hi. So thank you. My name's Kai Hall. I am the coordinator for the DC Transportation Equity Network, which is managed by Greater Washington. Thank you for allowing me to be here. I'm excited to listen in. Yeah, and I'll pass it to Neha.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Neha. I'm actually a recent grad from American University, and Karthik has brought me on to assist. So I'm super excited to see everybody and get started. And I'll pass it on to Emily.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Emily Ruskin. I'm a senior policy advisor in the Office of Racial Equity, which is part of the city administrator's office. And I'm here tonight because our office is co-chairing the mayor's automated traffic enforcement. It's got a very long title, but the automated traffic enforcement task force with Charlie, and Zach was gracious enough to loop us in when Karthik reached out. So thanks for having us. I'll pass off to Charlie.
Hi, everyone. My name's Charlie Wilson. I'm the interim director of the Vision Zero office in DC. I'm the co-chair of the task force that Emily just referenced. Thanks for having me. Oh, and I'll hand it to Zach.
Hey, good evening, everyone. This is Zach Smith with the District Department of Transportation, also liaison to the MAAC, and I will pass it to Kelly Mack.
Hi there, Kelly Mack. I'm a DC resident and wheelchair user, and happy to be here. And if there's time later, I'm happy to provide an update from the Department for Hired Vehicles Accessibility Advisory Committee, which gives advice on accessible taxi service in DC, and also a report that the American University Disability Law Clinic developed about problems with accessible cab service. So if there's time, I'm happy to do that later, Karthik.
Absolutely, that would be wonderful. Thanks, Kelly. And if you can pass it on to someone else, that would be great.
Thank you. How about Susie?
Hello, everyone. I am Susie McFadden-Rusper. I am from the DC Office of Disability Rights, and I am the ADA Compliance Specialist for Public Works.
And if you can pass it on to someone else, that would be wonderful.
Who's available? Heather?
So Heather's gone. Maybe I'll kick it over to Ashton.
Thanks, Karthik.
Ashton,
My name is Ashton. No worries. It's hard to keep track of all the movement. My name is Ashton. I am an advisory neighborhood commissioner for 6D05, which is in Southwest DC. And I care about our streets and who we prioritize when we're planning and designing them, and too often have seen, especially in my capacity as an advisory neighborhood commissioner, that the needs of folks with disabilities is overlooked or not kind of urgently addressed when they do arise. And so I look forward to the discussion today. And with that, I will pass it to Bashira. If she's able to join, but if not, I will kick it over to Santiago.
Thank you. I'm Santiago Lactos. I'm an ANC commissioner in 1B04, just north of the U Street corridor. I too care deeply about making sure that folks with disabilities, have equal access and equitable access in the district. So I'm here to listen in and learn more. Thank you for having me.
We've got Kim, I believe. Yes, Kim, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. I've been here before, but it's been quite a while. I'm actually faculty at Georgetown in the Department of Family Medicine. I'm a family physician. I've also been working in this space for years and teaching medical students and clinicians about all things related to differing abilities, individuals with lived experiences, and certainly transportation is a big piece. In fact, last year, our students actually did an infographic addressing some of the information that came out of this advisory council. So I'm just kind of circling back to see what's new.
Fantastic. Okay, great. And I think, Zach, have you gone?
Yes.
It's already gone. Okay, yes, apologies. Okay, yeah, so then our first item on the agenda is to turn it over to the ATE task force. Emily has come to represent, and Charlie as well. I want to preface this by saying, this is automated traffic enforcement cameras. If people aren't aware, are kind of the cameras that help people or help DC keep people accountable for running red lights and also speeding. We know that speeding and other kind of dangerous driving behavior is kind of the primary cause of our kind of spiraling death crisis on our streets. We did pass a joint resolution with the MAAC, with the BAC and the PAC, with a specific target. We've kind of identified, hey, it's, we have some tools, but there's still a big missing bucket here, and that big bucket that's missing, or kind of link that's missing, is okay. People are getting tickets, but people are able to basically continue driving and continue the reckless behavior without really any risk or any perceived risk of actually having to change their behavior. So specifically, there are hundreds of thousands of tow eligible cars, either tow eligible due to their moving or parking violations. And DC is nowhere near able to find and remove those cars from those dangerous drivers. So we've set a target for DPW and the DC government in general to kind of fix that broken link. That, hey, how do we actually get dangerous drivers away from these cars that they're using as weapons, and how do we take those cars away quickly so that they're not being used to hurt people. So we've set a target of 30% of all tow eligible vehicles that have over $1,000 in moving violations on them should be towed or otherwise immobilized by DPW or DC government in general by September 30th, 2024. So that's just over a year away. And that's something that we're deeply concerned about. And that's why all three councils came together to pick that particular issue. How do we get the most dangerous drivers off the streets, or the cars, those dangerous vehicles off the streets as quickly as possible. So I hope, and kind of we've teed up this issue for the chief equity officer and her kind of then counterpart, or kind of then deputy mayor, Lucinda Babers. So we're hoping that that is kind of very much baked into this plan of how do we actually fill that missing link and get the most dangerous drivers actually, operationalize this so that the most dangerous drivers are separated from their cars. So with that, I'll turn it over to Emily.
Thanks, Karthik. So I think Charlie is actually going to get us kicked off, and it looks like he's got his slides or his screen shared.
Hi, everyone. Can everybody hear me? This is Charlie.
Yes.
Great. And can everyone see my screen?
I think so. I see something. I'm not sure what it's just.
Great.
We can see your screen. We can see your screen.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone for having me. Once again, my name is Charlie Wilson. I'm the interim Vision Zero director for the DC Vision Zero office, which sits in the deputy mayor's office for operations and infrastructure. I'm excited to be here, and and I'm also relevant to tonight. I am the co-chair of the mayor's task force on ATE safety and equity. So I'm here to give an update on the work of the task force. See if I can. Okay. So for tonight, my presentation will start with a quick welcome, which I just did. Then I'll move into ATE context, the context around ATE, a recap of the task force and its scope, and then a bit of an update from the different subcommittees that we have, and then I'll open it up for questions. In terms of context around, oh, sorry, I shouldn't use jargon. ATE stands for Automated Traffic Enforcement. In my mind, I'd love it if everyone called them safety cameras, because I think one of the things that Karthik already covered is that vehicle speeds is far and away our most reliable, in a bad way, predictor of crash severity and frequency. And it makes sense if you think about it, because speed decreases your time to react, and then it increases the speed at which the crash happens. So those two things combined basically make it so that vehicle speeds are really the most important thing you can address when you're thinking about traffic safety. So a lot of what Vision Zero does, a lot of what DDOT does, a lot of what MPD and others do is thinking about speed management. And frankly, there's really not a better, well, I wouldn't say there's not a better speed management tool, but automated traffic enforcement cameras are an extremely effective way. They're an extremely important part of our safety toolbox. And they have been for a little while now. But before I get into all of that in greater detail, I'll mention our Vision Zero goals. Vision Zero is the idea that we will eliminate serious injuries and fatalities on our roadways. It's a commitment that the mayor made in 2015. The progress on Vision Zero has not been linear. It's a difficult goal. But I will say that we have some things that we can be proud of. DC is making big investments in the large capital projects that improve safety. One of the things about Vision Zero is that one of the most important things to do, sort of step one almost, is to establish where you're seeing your highest crash risk and your most injuries and your most fatalities. So we have a high injury network, that's the name of it, where we have about 5% of our roadway mileage and about 50% of our serious injuries and fatalities. So if you think about that, that's a highly disproportionate amount of our injuries and fatalities. So we focus on trying to re-engineer our high injury network. To that end, DC is making large investments in our capital projects. When I say capital projects, that means when you take a roadway for an entire corridor and you take a look at it from that perspective, trying to think about how to re-engineer it, think about who's using it to go where, how you allocate that space, and what you do to try to make it what we call self-enforcing, so that the speeds don't feel like the natural, the high speeds don't feel like the natural way to drive on it. DC is sort of lucky in a sense, having relatively dense environment, having a mix of travel uses, having a metro system. And so as a starting point, we are trying to take those advantages and make the arterial roadways, the largest, widest roadways in our network, re-engineered for slower speeds. So we're making big investments in that regard. Some of the recent places you might notice would be along Pennsylvania Avenue Southeast, which has been re-engineered between about 3rd and 13th Street Southeast, and several other roadways are in the works. Another thing I'll mention is that DC is a leader on bus priority and multimodal infrastructure. I mentioned bus priority because one of the biggest ways to get to Vision Zero is to change the mix of transportation options. And if more people are riding the bus is really the safest way to get around if you look at it on a per mile basis. So, and I know that's near and dear to this group, a lot of folks who ride the bus to get around. So the bus priority projects are the red lanes that you see all over. 3 or 4 years ago, DC made a commitment to look at about 50 roadways covering about 80 miles of road to consider it for transit priority. So in a lot of cases, that means painting the red bus lanes, but it also means looking at these corridors for the pedestrian safety, because what we know inherently is that if you're riding the bus, you're walking on the beginning and the end of your trip, right, to get to the bus stop. So whenever we touch a corridor for bus priority, we look at it for pedestrian and other vulnerable user safety. So there's been some exciting projects that have been, and the other exciting thing about the bus priority projects is that we've been able to do them relatively quickly. Projects that go from a concept, beginning to end in a year or two. So you go from having a sort of a conventional, like a roadway that's looked the same for 30, 40 years, can be really transformed. Minnesota Avenue, Southeast and Northeast is an example that's recently been totally re-engineered, adding some bike lanes in some cases, even though it was a bus priority project, adding the bus lanes where that can speed up the bus, simplifying intersections, adding traffic signals, all sorts of things. And I'm very proud of the fact that if you look at the speeds, particularly the speeds right near schools, because there's several schools along Minnesota Avenue, the speeds have gone from highly dangerous to much more reasonable. DC is also a leader on other forms of multimodal infrastructure, like bike lanes, which even if you never get on a bike, make the street safer for you. They serve as traffic calming, right? They make it so people drive a little bit slower. They separate the different uses and make it and simplify those interactions and eliminate some risky conflicts in a lot of cases. So multimodal infrastructure is a big deal. I'd also just want to mention that in keeping with the Automated Traffic Enforcement Task Force, there's a lot of policy and programmatic efforts that are multi-agency on Vision Zero. And so we'll get into some of that in a minute. In terms of our safety camera coverage, DC has more safety camera coverage than a lot of other cities in the US. Has about 135 cameras, 90 of which are speed, 90 something of which are speed cameras right now. And the plan is to basically triple that number in the very near future. So that was kind of the genesis of the Automated Traffic Enforcement Task Force, was the idea that we were really investing in the infrastructure, or our automated traffic enforcement infrastructure. So that's kind of what prompted the task force. I mentioned this a moment ago. Safety cameras work as a safety intervention. In DC, cameras decrease injury crashes by 30%. That's 12 months after they're installed. Cameras cite less than 1% of of passing drivers. And then those citations dropped by 1/3. So you're talking about 99% of passing vehicles are not being cited, which is a big deal because the goal is not to cite drivers, it's to slow people down. And then in 2019, about 70% of vehicles that received one citation received only one citation, which says a lot about the ability of these cameras to
Hey, Charlie, I don't know if it's just me, but your sound cut out just
scope.
now.
Whoops.
I also can't hear.
We lost you. Let's see. It seems like you are on slide 3, I think is where you cut out at the very end.
Charlie, maybe in call in, there's also a call option, or I could call you and put you on speaker if that. I don't know if you can hear us, so that's actually one problem. Maybe. Okay, great. He's going to call back in. That's great.
Okay, well, Charlie does that. And Zach, hopefully these are your slides so that we don't lose the screen. While Charlie calls back in, you can go back one, please. If
These aren't my slides, but I can.
Oh shoot.
can-
Okay. No, no worries, no worries. So I can just talk over this from the previous slides. So I think Charlie did a great job of sort of setting the scene of all of the work that went into this program and creating the ATE program before the task force was started. So DC is pretty unique in that it's one of the very few jurisdictions in which the automated camera program lives under the Department of Transportation as opposed to the police department, which is typically where it's housed. And it did used to be housed under MPD in DC up until about 2020. And so as a result, I need to go at 6 p.m. Thank you, Heather. Great to see you. So as a result of moving from MPD to DDOT, from our police department to our Department of Transportation, they're able to use a lot more data, both in the front end before the camera goes in, and now concurrently with the new tranche of cameras that are going up to get a better sense of sort of really fine tuning the effectiveness of the camera to measure at each intersection or at each sort of speed corridor exactly how much the traffic is changing, so that they know if they need to increase the number of cameras on that corridor to make more of like an actual sort of like hallway effect. So that's part of the reason that the program itself is expanding, and that happened, the vote on that, it was a council executive decision jointly, and that I think was already 2 cycles ago. So because of the way in which our budgets work, and there's a little bit of a lag between sort of when the money gets appropriated and then, you know, the number of years that go in between before they actually start to go up, those cameras are going to start to go up this coming fiscal year. So starting in October 1, you're going to start to see them growing all over the city. And I think that was sort of the moment at which people felt like now is a great time to have the conversation about not just how this impacts the traffic and speeds and traffic outcomes, so safety outcomes in our city, but the other sort of downstream secondary effects of traffic enforcement, which namely are financial penalties, because of the way in which we use financial penalties as sort of the largest deterrent, our main deterrent, right? So tickets, and the ways in which tickets can be essentially financially regressive, right? Because, which is to say that for someone who lives on a low income, $100 ticket is a much larger proportion of their monthly take home than for someone who's a middle to high income earner. And so that's sort of the genesis of this task force, was to think not just about what can we be doing to make sure that our ATE program is not only just state of the art and saving as many lives as possible, because I think as Charlie helped us to set the stage, really sort of the gold standard is engineering the environment so that people drive more safely. The people that choose to and have to drive more safely. And then sort of understanding that takes quite some time to get there, right? Capital projects are very long, drawn out processes. And in the interim, ATE is a proven effective safety measure that can help to reduce speeds and reduce crashes. And so this task force was born out of that conversation to think about what, if anything, can we do to make the cameras even more effective in saving lives and reducing crashes and keeping people safe, while at the same time not sort of creating this unintended sort of displaced financial burden on people on low incomes. And so that's what we've been focusing on and working on for the last 5 months. And that timeline showed sort of how it's broken up into a year and a half. And so this first sprint is what we're coming up on the end of very soon, at the end of the month. We've been working across 3 subcommittees, working very hard to try and get recommendations in front of the city administrator across across many different issues. First and foremost, looking at what would be possible to pilot in this coming fiscal year to sort of address that financial issue that I just discussed. And then to Dr. Balasubramanian's point, what can we be doing to enforce against the most dangerous drivers? And then in parallel to that, an additional group looking at, we know that we need to get to the capital projects, and that's where we're working towards. But in that interim, what else can we be doing on sort of the driver education side as a safety layer, and creating a culture of safety and also an awareness of safety, and if at all, behavioral nudges, or sort of shaping the driver behavior from that end. And so trying to look at it as comprehensively as possible. And that first report is due to the CA in 2 weeks. We are working frantically to get it together. It's been sort of a great joint effort across agencies. And so that's what we would like to talk a little bit about tonight. But I'll hand it back off to Charlie, who got unceremoniously cut off by the internet.
I hope you can hear me now. Can folks hear me again?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Folks who are managing the call, give me a bit of a time check. I'm imagining we might be over. Or let me know if you want to give me a sense of ballpark how much more time I have. I can try to work towards that.
We've got about 27 more minutes or so.
Okay. Oh, meaning I don't need to leave additional time or for other agenda items.
Maybe if we can leave, the kind of 15 minutes for questions, so maybe another kind of 12 minutes of intro.
Okay, great. Yeah, I won't take that long. Okay, great. So the ATE task force has full task force meetings roughly monthly. Those are open to the public. The next one is next week. You can join it using this link that you see on the screen. We are also planning to have additional ways to engage the public beyond task force meetings, including getting people's sense of their attitudes about automated traffic enforcement and their reactions to different potential interventions that we might suggest. And then at that same task force website, you can see the meeting recordings and slides as soon as possible following each of those public meetings. So we have 3 subcommittees as part of the task force. Somebody just chime in and tell me if I'm repeating something that Emily said while I was off. But so we have the subcommittee that's working on suggesting ideas for a pilot program. Primary goal there is to address some of the equity concerns about a fine-based system, punitive fine-based system, and also look at ways to, improve the system in other ways. And the second subcommittee is the ticket enforcement and compliance group. And the third, and that has to do with some of the stuff that would be the one that's probably most on point to what Dr. Balasubramanian is talking about, the idea of figuring out how to get at some of the folks who maybe get multiple tickets. Finally, the driver education and behavior change group is taking a look at some of the ideas to marginally improve the effectiveness of the cameras using behavioral science, basically. So the ticket enforcement and compliance subcommittee is studying approaches to improving ticket compliance. And by ticket compliance, that means ticket payment, including looking at past ticket amnesties, interjurisdictional reciprocity, fine schedules, ticket penalties, and examples from other jurisdictions. This is the one, and I guess we'll have questions about it in the Q&A section. But this, some of the ideas and approaches coming out of this group would have to do with looking at how much tickets cost compared to other jurisdictions and the potential deterrent effects those have, but also the interplay that has with the payment, rates, looking at how when it says ticket amnesties, that term may not be familiar to folks. The idea being that there may be unpaid tickets that the DC government allows folks to come back and pay a portion of to get them back into good standing on a sort of a one-time basis. It's also looking at ideas for interjurisdictional reciprocity. Unfortunately, that is a major challenge. It requires other jurisdictions to want to treat our tickets sort of equally to theirs. And frankly, when we give 1.5 million of the tickets, some of the other jurisdictions have been really hesitant to engage full reciprocity. I do want to mention, in terms of reciprocity, we do have reciprocity in the sense that we have access to the records and addresses and names of all the drivers in our surrounding jurisdictions. So these people are receiving the tickets. Most people pay them. The unpaid tickets are sort of overwhelmingly from folks who get multiple tickets. Another piece is that unsuccessfully contested tickets also make up the vast majority of unpaid tickets. So it's like if folks challenge the ticket and then they're unsuccessful and then they still don't pay. That's the vast majority of tickets. And again, it's like mostly folks who have many of them. So about 2/3 of people just get one. And then a group of people who gets 3 or more is a particularly small group, but to folks' point, that's a group that's creating risk. So I think one of the things that group is thinking about is, potentially, so legally speaking right now, the only basis on which we boot and tow vehicles is based on the dollar amount that they owe in terms of debt. But a lot of those debts could be largely be fees, like that. If you don't pay, your fines double, and they can also be parking tickets, which are maybe less connected to safety. So the idea might be thinking of ways to connect that booting and towing effort to citations that are more connected to safety, like red light running or high level speeding. The pilot committee is studying the feasibility and advisability of a pilot program to balance traffic safety and equitable traffic fine burdens. We talked a bit about that. Some of the general ideas would have to do with possibly having escalating fines as you get more, because again, as most people get one, so as a way to deter folks from getting multiple, we could have escalating fines. Another one might be income-based fines based on a sort of a categorical eligibility, proving that you're low income. And then others would have to do with establishing payment plans for folks as a way to possibly blunt the impacts of the cost of the tickets if you can pay them off over time as opposed to all at once. And then the last category of potential pilots, what have I said? Income-based payment plans, alternatives to fines, alternatives to monetary fines. So that could take the course of like educational classes or other things as opposed to a monetary fine. Obviously a course related to safe driving. And then that pilot will be done on a, if it's feasible, we implemented it in fiscal year 24, which starts on October 1st, and then we might expand it. The driver education and behavior change report out would advise the task force on complements to and advancements in ATP practices to reduce traffic crashes and fatalities and improve driver education and behavior change. One of the examples that we've already pursued in this regard that folks may have heard about is our risky driver messaging pilot, where we use the data from the automated traffic enforcement cameras and found a subset of drivers who have 2 or more tickets and are therefore at greater risk of crash. And then we basically tell them that, because the idea is a lot of folks think they're average, but this messaging effort is there to remind folks that they're actually not average, they're actually at an increased risk of crashes. And we're hoping that that can have some influence over folks. That's already in the field. Those messages are out there, and then we'll be able to, it's an exciting thing with the lab in DC. They're going to actually evaluate and look at folks' crash risk before and after receiving those messages, and it's going to be a controlled trial. So there's folks in the sample that are getting a text message, folks that are getting a letter, folks that are getting both, and then folks that are getting neither, and then we'll be able to discern some element of its effect on crash risk. So it's a very interesting pilot that sort of leverages the automated traffic enforcement on a wide range of drivers. I think at this point that's the update. So I'm happy to take questions and have further discussion.
Great. So we'll start off with MAAC members, and then and if other folks have questions, please raise your hand. And then yeah, we've got good time. So we've got Buddy, actually, so Buddy and Zach. So Buddy, let's start off with you. Do you have any questions?
Yes, so Charlie, 2 questions. The first question is, I'm not a driver, so I'm not familiar with the photo enforcement program. How does it work? Or if I'm a driver, does the camera take a picture of the vehicle's tag and the driver, and then what happens? Can you sort of walk me through what happens?
Great question, Buddy. Absolutely. So the answer to your question is that the cameras take a picture of the back of the vehicle so they can capture the license plate, and they so then then they're able to match that license plate to a registered vehicle, and then that's how they issue the citation. In between that, it goes from being a photograph taken by a camera to a citation that is actually issued by a person. We have folks who actually issue the tickets who are employed, people who are employed by the District of Columbia government, who are then looking at the images. They know what they're looking at, and they're assuring that what the camera thinks it saw is accurate, and that on that basis of that image or that video, they go ahead and issue that citation. I'll take a moment now also to mention that we have a few different categories of automated traffic enforcement. We have the speed cameras. That's far and away the largest category. And so those cite folks for going past a camera at a speed greater than the speed limit. And like I said, we have about 90 of those at the moment all over the district. We have about 30, I think, red light cameras. And what those capture is if somebody goes through a red light, goes through an intersection against the red light. So that's the other kind. And then we have a very small number of cameras that are set up at stop signs that can capture when folks don't actually come to a complete stop at a stop sign. So those are the 3. And so, yeah, you're exactly right. It takes a photo of the back of a vehicle to capture that license plate. Part of the nature, I won't go too deep here, but because you asked, and I think you were they're definitely, you may have been onto this. The way automated traffic enforcement citations work now is they're attached to a vehicle as opposed to a person. So if you were driving around speeding and you were pulled over by a police officer or other member of law enforcement, that ticket is going to be on your driver's license on you in your name as the driver. And that is a distinction currently with automated traffic enforcement citations. They are attached to a vehicle, and then they're mailed to the registered owner who, you know, is responsible for paying it. But in terms of a legal distinction, it is that is a legal distinction. So whenever we're talking about, I hope I said it correctly earlier, I always try to, but the data I shared on repeat citees, that you'd be talking about vehicles, right? So of all the vehicles that receive citations, 70% of them got just one. Does that help?
Yeah, okay. And my other question has to do.
And you had a second one?
Yes, the other question has to do with bus priority lanes. Other than motorists, are there any other groups that are against bus priority lanes?
Are there folks who are against bus priority lanes? Oh, and thank you for mentioning it. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit, I think, getting cut off. We're also going to have cameras that are going to enforce folks going into the bus lanes inappropriately, illegally, because, you know, when the bus lane is active, private vehicles can't be in it except to make right turns. So that we have them, and they're about to go live. We're going to have cameras in the bus, so the bus will snap the photograph, or we're going to have some that are fixed at a location, and they're going to capture folks who are violating the bus lane restrictions. That's really important because those bus lanes have to be clear to really work, to really get to the goals that we have, which is the faster and more reliable bus speeds, because that, you know, that reliability and that speed of the bus is what allows people to use them on a regular basis to get around. And the more people we have in the bus, the safer we all are, and it's better from all sorts of other perspectives as well, climate and otherwise. The question is, are there people who are against it? You know, there's always trade-offs in any transportation project, right? And so, you know, if that bus lane means that you can't park in front of your favorite convenience store for several hours a day, I guess there are folks who are worried about that, right? They are, you know, they arguably decrease the capacity of the roadway for private drivers who are trying to drive on the roadway. So, I mean, they're not without their trade-offs, but absolutely. But I think bottom line, DC has made a very strong and firm commitment to bus priority, and that's not wavering. And I think you're probably, if you're traveling around the district, you're noticing more and more of those bus lanes around. So.
Yeah. So, but are you also getting pushback from business owners? Because if you lose parking spaces in front of a business, then of course that cuts down on the profit for the business, right?
In some cases, folks are just not sure, right? If you're running a small business, you're probably running it on really small margins, right? You're probably really worried about, well, if there's a change to the environment around my business, I'm not sure what'll happen, and I don't want to lose key business and not be able to maintain, you know, my livelihood. So we're sensitive to that, absolutely. I think one of the things is typically we do bus lanes that are rush hour direction, so it's like you're losing that parking, but not necessarily all day. That's sometimes the case because it's not totally necessary to have it be reserved as a bus lane all day to achieve the bus speeds that we want to see. So there's always a way to, not always a way, but you know, there are ways to make sure we're accommodating the needs, you know, legitimate needs of folks. But the bus speeds, I mean, one of the things I like to say is I think if you have a reliable, fast bus running past your business, that's probably going to bring you a lot of business as well. A lot of customers are going to come that way as well. So.
Okay. Thanks, Charlie. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you for the questions. Who's next? Or should I?
Oh, Karthik, I think you're muted.
There we go. Yes, apologies. Any other MAC questions? I'll ask a couple questions and then we'll turn it over to kind of public questions. One question that I had was specifically around the kind of the increasing prevalence of obscured and fake tags. What percentage, do we know what percentage of ATE violations are not actually able to get to the owner of the vehicle because of obscured tags or fake tags?
We have a number for, yes, yeah, I mean, with that's in the data. I'm sorry, Dr. Balasubramanian, I was talking to someone about this recently, but I don't want to say a percentage on a recording. I can get back to you though. It'll be in the report. Yes, it's a, you know, we have that as a group. I'm sorry, I don't want to say it and be wrong. I apologize, but yeah, it's something that will be in the report. Because yeah, you're right. It's an issue. It's something that council is also looking to legislate. And yeah, I think it makes sense. Look, registering your vehicle appropriately serves a lot of purposes, right? It's not there just to annoy people, right? It's there because now we know your vehicle is environmentally sound. We know that your car is safe. We know, you know, all sorts of things about it. So absolutely, the interest is in having those tags up to date and open. In terms of the, but in terms of the percentage, yeah, it'll be in the report, and I can get, as soon as I can track it down and establish that it's, you know, generally terrible. Yeah.
All kind of going along. So because we don't have data, it's just kind of anecdotally, we'll see like kind of people with fake tags are, you know, anecdotally, I've seen at least people kind of driving especially recklessly because there's no, because, you know, they've already, you know, if they don't see any particular, if they see no repercussions to driving recklessly, then they'll just continue doing so. And the one tool that we do have to rein them in is basically rendered useless because of kind of the game that they're playing. And that's something that we're kind of very, you know, as I mentioned before, we're very concerned about kind of not grandma who's you know, driving, you know, 1 mile over the speed limit. And you know, getting you know, one citation. We're really concerned about the crazies who are operating their vehicles with reckless abandon and kill people, like the people that like the, you know, the woman who drove her car at 100 miles an hour with over $10,000 of violations and killed 3 people on Rock Creek Parkway. Those are the people that we, you know, had we had a system where we could find where we prioritized that lady's Lexus, we could separate that lady from her Lexus so that instead of, you know, driving and killing 3 people in the early morning, she was doing something else and maybe even getting some treatment for alcoholism, but just not
right. So yeah, I agree, and I would build on that and say absolutely. So taking a safety oriented approach, right? Like thinking about if we have booting and towing at our disposal, let's be strategic about it, right? So, you know, don't necessarily focus purely on, somebody could have 15 parking tickets, and while we want to enforce parking restrictions and make them real, maybe we, you know, think about the person with 3 tickets for going 20 miles an hour over, that kind of thing. As I mentioned earlier, at the moment, the legal regime is set up around unpaid tickets. As opposed to just sort of like what the tickets are. Although, you know, I think we could probably still go in that direction even without a legal change, right? You could still prioritize certain ones over others. So yeah, that's right. I think I will say, I know this is an unpopular opinion, perhaps among folks, but I don't know that going after the like expired tags, we just don't know if that correlates. Like you said, anecdotally, you notice it, but the other thing is you could register your vehicle in Virginia and then get 10 speeding tickets, and then once you get towed, you know, get a new license in another state, or you know what I mean? Like there's lots of other things you can do besides the fake tag thing, and I think, you know, I think registering your vehicle is expensive, and we're thinking about the equity implications. And so going after people who, maybe have let their registration expire without any real evidence base that that's correlated with the unsafe driving, I guess I'll be honest with you that I'm a little hesitant speaking personally, but I'm hearing you and I'm agreeing with you that there are ways to think strategically about the way we use booting and towing. Yep.
Even expired tags, though, like even if I have an expired tag, DC, the government still knows who that is registered to. It just happens to be expired. But I think the more pernicious, much more pernicious, are people who obscure their tags, and also people who use fake tags that are actually not registered anywhere. Those are the two types that we have no idea who these people are. And it's basically allowing someone with an unregistered gun to wave their gun and shoot bullets around. That's what's happening. So that's something that I want to particularly focus on. Have we heard from DPW on prioritization? I've kind of tried to bring this up in a few different forums, but I kind of feel like there's not really any movement.
So yeah, there's movement. I mean, I think so. So the biggest movement is that DPW is about to be fully staffed with booters. Folks who are going around putting boots on vehicles. That's the first step to towing them. So now we have 3 or 4 times as many people actively running shifts to boot and tow. So I mean, that's going to go a long way. Then there's an issue with once you ramp up booting and towing, you pretty quickly run out of space at the tow lot. So then we'd have to figure out where do we find more space to tow vehicles to? How do we get ruthlessly efficient with getting those vehicles cycled through whatever process they need to be cycled through so that they can leave the lot, and not take up space for other vehicles that can be towed. So I mean, those are the big movements. I would say also having booting and towing happening during nightlife periods is another example of something that is a way to possibly reach some of these folks who are frankly kind of savvy about staying out of public space and avoiding being booted and towed. So if you go out during nightlife periods, you might be able to catch some more of these folks. So those are some of the areas of movement. Yeah, and then like I said, stay tuned for the report from the task force, which will talk about some of the options for being more strategic about how we funnel the resources of booting and towing.
There's actually one other thing that I also haven't gotten kind of like a clear sense of where the government is right now, and that's using private towers. Both NPS and Secret Service both tow using a private towing company called ANA, and that provides apparently it must be legal given that they're doing it out of DC. And that is a way that we can augment DPW capacity, which my sense is that we're not even multiplying by 4 or 3 or 4. We really need to be multiplying by 100 in order to actually meet the moment. So yeah, have you heard of anything on that front?
I think DC has tried it in the past and it has not gone well. I think like these are not folks representing the government, frankly, and so then maybe their incentives are a little off and they tow vehicles inappropriately because there's sort of less downside for them to do that because they haven't, there's not the public trust and stuff. So I think that's the big issue. I think another issue is I'm not sure how well it works for them to tow to their lot. So anyway, I'm not sure how much you could solve it with the private tow trucks without the additional tow space. So I think the tow space is really sort of the operative issue. So that's sort of job one as well. So that's my understanding of those two things.
Got it. The suggestion that I think it would make here is creating a pre-authorization list of like, hey, these are vehicles that we've already come up with a framework. Vehicles that are associated with $1,000 or more of moving violation fines. These are basically like the AK-47s that are just laying around that we need to go and get. And those are
right.
Whoever go pick them up, they should be picked up and thrown away because they're going to be operated to kill people.
Right. Yeah. The that's one thing I didn't mention about the lab studies. When they were formulating their subset of people to target, they were able to run the numbers between the citations from the cameras and then the crash involvement in DC and find the risk correlation there, which is helpful first step towards kind of what you're talking about. So yeah, like I think going 20 miles an hour over or running a red light, those both sort of popped in the data as things that are, obviously they're risky, and then they correlate with crash involvement.
Excellent.
So yeah, those two. Yeah.
Appreciate it. So yeah, we've got time for one more. So Kai, I see your hand up. So please feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
Awesome. Thank you. First of all, thank you for the presentation. Very informative. So the question I had a few questions, but I'll narrow it down to one. With the upcoming hearing on October 4th, the joint hearing with T&E and Operations Committee, I'm wondering if there's anything in the course of the work that you've been doing, your team's been doing, that you would like to see from the legislature, especially among within the 4 bills that they're considering. Is there anything there in particular that stands out for the work that you're doing, or that has potential for the work you're doing? I'm just curious.
Sure. So I mean, I think there's things that a lot of the things embodied in the bills would potentially have influence over traffic safety and driver behavior. I think it's just always a matter of balancing the equity concerns, the operational, the feasibility of it, and then the matter of prioritization. I sort of hinted at it a minute ago, while certainly fake tags, or obscured tags or expired tags intuitively lead you to the idea of avoiding accountability. It's not totally clear, how many of those types of vehicles are even out there and how much that, type of behavior actually correlates with crash risk. So, it's always a matter of figuring out the sweet spot of what's feasible, what's a good use of resources, what's going to give us the best return on investment if we were to change things. But yeah, I think it's going to be an extremely fruitful discussion with all the different agencies and the committees. I'm glad that this attention is being paid to this topic. Yeah, so I mean, I think all of it's worthwhile. I mean, I think we talked a bit about thinking about the booting and towing in terms of safety outcomes instead of just pure amount owed. That's the kind of conversation that I'm sure will be robustly had in that meeting, in that hearing. But yeah, just in general, gratified, not glad because it's not a good situation obviously currently, but gratified that there's some real serious attention being paid to these important issues.
Okay, and any last questions from anyone? I think we've gotten everything. Charlie, we really appreciate you presenting on the AT task force, and also please give our thanks to Emily. We're actually going into, so our next item is our transportation accessibility and equity scorecard that actually touches quite heavily on Vision Zero. So would love it if you could stay, but understand if you can't, given that it's 6:30. So yeah, I will drop a link to this proposal in the chat. But basically what this kind of grew out of was kind of trying to get a nail down a set of metrics that we can use to assess how our government is achieving kind of a more equitable and accessible transportation network with a particular focus on safety, because folks with disabilities are twice as likely to be living in zero-car households. So already 40% of, or nearly 40% of DC lives in a zero-car household, so they don't have access to cars. So really kind of they don't get the benefit of being able to use a car, but share all of the downside risk. So basically being kind of maimed or killed or otherwise injured by cars that are oftentimes driving dangerously. But kind of we as people with disabilities are kind of significantly more likely to not have a car. So again, kind of given that most of our streets are designed around, or the vast majority of our streets are designed around throughput of cars, we want to make sure that, hey, in the 21st century, given that we have such a large percentage of people who can't either afford to or have the ability to use a car, they're not being burdened by a road network that puts them at risk of death or injury. So this is a proposal. So kind of this is, we've had this discussion over the past couple of months. Let me share my screen. And basically what this is a set of kind of proposed metrics. There are a lot of metrics that we could use, but a set of proposed metrics that we've got that can get to, hey, how do we make our road network kind of safer and more equitable and accessible to people with disabilities. So there are a lot of them, but I've taken a shot at narrowing it down to 5. Would love your feedback on a real-time basis. So I'll just kind of walk everybody through this. So feel free to just, unfortunately, I won't be able to see the screen or see your faces. So feel free to just unmute yourself and shout out, hey, this is, what about this, what about that, or ask any questions. But I wanted to just kind of share my proposal and based on the feedback that I've gotten in the meetings, and then also kind of feedback that I've gotten from outside as well, and would just kind of love feedback in general. So basically, again, just a little bit upfront, there are 75,000 people plus with disabilities in DC. Folks with disabilities are twice as likely to not own a car already. 40% of people don't own a car. In fact, when we're talking about equity, people who are poor and are poorer wards, in Ward 7 and 8 especially, that's when car ownership is the lowest. And kind of thus, it's kind of particularly important where the burdens of traffic violence fall the heaviest, that we shift away from kind of centering the able-bodied car driver in our transportation network design. So we've come up with, I took a shot at coming up with 5 different metrics from a lot that we've discussed, and I can show you some of the other ones that we've discussed as well. But the first is a percentage of intersections with accessible pedestrian signals. So these are pedestrian signals. Accessible pedestrian signals are kind of sometimes also known as audible walk signals that announce when it is safe to cross. These are particularly helpful for people with visual disabilities. Then Kelly actually brought this up. The U.S. Access Board came out with new federal requirements on block phases. This is so the percentage of intersections that comply with the U.S. Access Boards. These are actually kind of legally enforceable now, kind of brand new standards that they just kind of emerged from the final rulemaking. So those, whether or not our intersections or percentage of our intersections that comply with these federal regulations. Then percentage of our centerline miles, basically kind of the number of roadway miles essentially, of DC's high entry network. So these are DC's high entry network is out of Vision Zero, where they've identified the road segments that are kind of the most prone to, or kind of historical data has shown to be the most dangerous. The most people who have died on those streets or have been killed on those streets, and then also have gotten injured. And given that we know that people who are outside of a car, especially people with disabilities who are disproportionately likely to be outside of a car, are significantly more likely to survive when they're struck at less than 20 miles an hour versus 30 or 40 miles an hour, which is kind of totally nonlinear in kind of how much the risk of death becomes as speeds increase. Are these high entry networks, roads designed for speeding? And specifically, there's a design speed is kind of a unique term in the road engineering manual. So DDOT has the design and engineering manual, and AASHTO is the kind of American Association for State and Transportation Highway something or other. But basically, kind of a set of manuals look at these, kind of use this term design speed as the target speed for vehicles. And if that target speed for vehicles is higher than 20 miles an hour, then that's a problem. And this is one of the first things that we can and should do, is to reduce speed on our most dangerous roads. So that's something that we had talked about before. Another thing on safety is specifically left turn conflicts. The left turn movement of a car is among the most dangerous maneuvers that you can make with the car, and especially especially to pedestrians. This is where a lot of pedestrians are killed or injured. And so, there are a lot of roads that we've got where there is a legal, where intersections are designed legally for when both the car can go and a pedestrian can cross. A pedestrian can have a walk signal, and a car can legally go, and that is kind of one clear way where people are being put at risk of injury or death for only the convenience of able-bodied car commuters. And that's something that we want to start to measure as well. And then lastly, this is something that we hadn't discussed before, but I do want to highlight, because I've actually dug into this data, or dug in to try to find this. But in the event of emergency, DC has emergency evacuation routes. But I don't know if you've ever seen an emergency evacuation, but it's basically bumper to bumper cars. And if we have an emergency that requires people with disabilities or just people to leave, basically anyone without a car is, especially if our kind of metro system is down, our rail system is down, anyone without a car is basically going to be forced to walk. So basically, without a dedicated transit lane on our emergency evacuation routes, this is a scenario where basically, in the worst case, people with disabilities are going to be left to die simply because they don't have a car, and because we have not created a street network or a road network where the most accessible form of transit, our buses, are given priority to actually to move people with disabilities and in general people without a car. So this is something that kind of really hoping that we can dig into, of because right now, as it stands, as far as I can tell, in these scenarios, people without a car, especially if the rail network is down, are basically just out of luck, and are just going to be left to die in those situations. And that's something that I kind of really, really would like to focus in on. These are all kind of in the form of percentages. So it would be great to these data kind of exist in some places. And kind of it would be great to kind of start putting these together, and then start tracking these, and start kind of seeing, these are some things that personally I think can make our streets significantly safer. And if we can start tracking these, that would be great. I'll mention kind of some of the other ideas that we had talked about, percentage of intersections that are not in compliance with DC statute, specifically around sight lines. So kind of there are plenty of places where parking obscures visibility for car drivers, and they end up hitting and killing people because they're not able to see pedestrians because of parked cars that kind of we have particularly we're actually kind of legally parked due to where the signs are placed, but kind of are actually illegally, but the signs are illegally placed. And similarly with crosswalks, there are plenty of locations like that. Percentage of active approved traffic control plans. We had a kind of a large conversation earlier this year about traffic control plans that DDOT is granting that allow the closure of sidewalks. And this is, again, back to safety, major safety consideration. DDOT had made a traffic control plan permit for DC Water on Rhode Island Avenue and closed a sidewalk. And predictably, but horrendously, someone was killed because that sidewalk was closed, and that was a permitted closure. So we really want to understand kind of why and when that happens. This is supposed to be done as a last resort. Kind of anecdotally, we know that it's not. Similarly, lane miles dedicated to private parking vehicles. Kind of again, folks with disabilities are significantly more likely to not own a car. Folks, scooters is another major topic, especially for folks with disabilities who really rely on the sidewalks. Scooters that are strewn on the sidewalk block their path, and this really needs to stop. Because when those scooters are placed in such a way that it blocks wheelchair access, people that might make the difference between someone being able to make it to their job on time or just traverse one place to another safely. And we need to figure out how to turn this, how to put a stop to this. And then similarly, this is kind of one thing that we had mentioned before, the $1,000 in moving violations, making sure that the craziest drivers are separated from their cars by September 30th, 2024. That's in partnership with the MAAC, the BAC and the PAC. And then kind of emergency evacuation mileage without a bus lane. The above metric is just whether or not it, not just a mileage, but whether or not kind of every particular section has a bus lane or not. Any disparity between highway spending, which is specifically focused on car movement and only car movement, versus sidewalks, which is specifically focused on people who are not in cars. And then a couple others that we're waiting for kind of further data from DDOT. So percentage of complaints of safe accommodation violations that are not addressed in 24 hours or are addressed in 24 hours. And then lastly, kind of the percentage of traffic engineers who haven't traversed an arterial intersection without a manual wheelchair, blindfolds, earplugs, and person, or just in general with a person with disabilities. This came out of a meeting with one of our traffic engineers on one project who kind of really wasn't aware of kind of the experience of people with disabilities, and we want to make sure that changes. So that's I wanted to kind of present that, and I know I just talked straight for 10 minutes, but would love feedback on any of this. So any of the kind of the 5 proposed metrics that we focus on, any tweaks or deletions, additions, anything else. Would love kind of open floor. So if folks can just kind of unmute themselves and share their feedback, that would be wonderful.
Okay, just before everyone starts to share, I just want to say that in terms of the data that's available, a lot of these different metrics, we just don't have data on it at DDOT. It doesn't exist. So some of these would require a huge lift to do a study. And if that's the case, I think that we should talk about that outside of a report card.
Yeah, I'm confident. I agree that there should be some in-depth study on these issues that just heard.
Yeah. And kind of, and maybe there are some things that so for example, like if we don't have a particular data piece, if we don't have something in particular, then we can figure out, okay, is it worth it to like try to develop this data, or kind of contract with someone to start kind of collecting this data. So yeah, would love to would love to get feedback.
I have a question. I think it's for Zach. Hi, it's Kelly. I guess it would be helpful to know what data points are already available or not. And I don't know if that could be noted in the draft report, or, you know, because maybe we do want to start with things that are already available, but not knowing what those are, I wouldn't be able to give good guidance.
Sure. And I know we've had conversations with the chair about what's available and what's not before. I will say, looking at this list right now, the first couple points should be available. But everything else, looking at how it's written, is not necessarily available. So I guess one way to start would be to just to understand, what is it that the end goal is? What are we just gathering data for? What purpose?
Yep. So can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is what we got. This is what we got from DDOT back. AWS, it seems like this is kind of a clear cut, or kind of our audible walk signals. This is kind of like a clear cut. We can get this data. I actually haven't had time to talk about this with Zach. So like, we know for certain that, so there's new guidance that basically says, there's new guidance that basically says they're all signals need to be timed such that the walking speed is at most 3.5 feet per second or less, with the 7-second walk phase timing minimum. So is this the case that, you know, we know for certain that all of our signals meet this requirement?
At least, or better, yes. We've been using 3.5 feet per second. Yeah.
Okay, great. And the 7-second minimum?
That I would have to check, but
okay.
I definitely know we've been using 3.5 feet per second.
Okay, that's great. That's great. So that we can rotate this. We can rotate this off. That's fantastic. So the thought behind these. So these are three where DDOT's come back and said the data doesn't exist. So the thought behind these percent of centerline miles of DC's high entry network with design speed of greater than or equal to 20 miles an hour. So we know. So what we do have for certain is DC high injury network. We know what those segments are, so we can calculate the centerline miles. And when we say centerline miles, we mean basically, you know, given, so this is, for example, M Street Southwest. So M Street Southwest, I think, is like a 6-lane, if not more, highway instead of M Street Southwest. And so this segment is probably about a half mile right here. But lane miles are basically, you know, the 6 lanes times the half mile segment. But this is the centerline mile. This is just half a mile or so here. So we have the denominator for this metric. Now we just need to know basically, hey, what's the design speed of M Street Southwest? So the DEM and AASHTO and MUC, the AASHTO manual and MUTCD all reference the design speed. So I actually don't know, what does it mean that the data doesn't exist?
Well, from what the traffic engineers have told me, design speed is usually used when there's a new highway constructed. So a lot of what we would consider design speed is the original speed that it was constructed for. So a lot of our streets may not necessarily we don't know the design speed because it was built so long ago. it may be possible for a calculation to determine what the design speed is, but I guess this is an example of what is it that's warranted, or what's needed.
So
Like, how would you?
So the key here is that, so basically kind of the reason for this, the reason I'm putting this forward is, so for example, like all of these streets are super dangerous, and they're kind of recognized by the district as the most dangerous streets in the district. So the question is like, hey, like, why are they so dangerous? Most of these streets are like pretty wide. We know that, so design speed kind of specifically affects two variables. One, it's the variable of number of lanes, and then second, it's the variable of the width of the lanes. So it turns out like this is a little bit like, it turns out this is actually kind of a really big deal, because the wider the lanes are, the faster that drivers go. So one relatively easy fix is basically restriping roads so that their design speed is lower. So there was a big emphasis on a campaign called 20 is Plenty by DDOT to bring down the speeds, and actually posting signs so that the default speed limit was 20. But the problem is that if the signs are just saying 20, but the road is still being designed, it still has 6 lanes, and most of them are over 10-foot lanes. Basically anything over 10 feet, you see an increase in car speed. If our design speeds are still greater than 20, then people are going to go faster than 20. And then when people go faster than 20, people get killed or otherwise injured, especially, and we're especially at risk as people with disabilities. So basically what we want to do is we want to say, hey, okay, like these are the most dangerous roads. We want to make sure that we're not making any compromises on safety. So, given that these lanes, speed is such a, overriding factor, we want to make sure that these roads are everything that we can do to reduce the design speed to under 20 is done.
Well, I would just say for 20 is Plenty, I think that's more so local roads than those high injury networks. Like a lot of those sort of larger roads, yes, it would be great to reduce the speed. But I think there could be unintended consequences, right? Like New York Avenue, Florida Avenue, they're bigger streets to take traffic away from those local roads. And I think if we were to design them in a way that they're only 20 miles per hour, whether that's restriping or adding some other safety treatment, maybe that's possible. But again, I guess what is the goal to have the speed limit reduced to 20 miles per hour?
The goal is to reduce speed so less people die.
And I guess, getting that data from the design speed, aside from any other treatment.
Well, so this basically what this will show is, like, okay, these are streets. Hey, maybe this street, maybe the problem isn't speed, because maybe the design speed is already less than 20. But on this road or on this road, whoa, like the design speed is 45. We really need to work on this ASAP.
But I guess if they're already in the high injury network, those are roads that we've identified that we need to do some work on.
Right. So basically it's kind of the thing that we need. So it's kind of specifically focused on, hey, which ones are the worst ones that we should say, okay, they're on the high injury network. What are we doing to reduce speeds ASAP? And those two variables of number of lanes and the number of lanes and the width of lanes is a major problem. So especially if a road is being designed for 45, we know that the odds of someone being killed or injured is much, much higher when someone's going 45. So basically we want to understand, like, hey, we can get the speed limits, but all of the design manuals are actually based on this one number of design speed. So we want to get that design speed.
I guess I would still have the question of what if we've identified that these are high entry networks and this is the corridor. I guess I still don't understand what gathering and doing all the work and analysis to determine what that design speed is would actually help.
Yeah, it's basically is saying, have we done what we can to reduce speeding? So have we done what we can to lower speeds? So basically, okay, so let's say there are, I don't know, maybe 100 centerline miles all over the district in high entry network. We want that number to be, and if they're all being designed for less than 20, for example, and maybe that number is 25, I'm not sure. But if they're all being designed for less than 25 or less than 20, then we've done what we can to reduce the biggest contributor to death, and that's speed. So basically we can say, hey, there's 100 centerline miles, 90 of them are designed at less than 20 miles an hour. Check, that's great. That gets an A. That gets an A for kind of the work that we've done to do what we need to do to reduce the most dangerous driving. But if it's, for example, if only 5% or 20% or 30% of these roads have a design speed that is conducive to not killing people, then that would basically be an F or a failing grade that we need to really focus on fixing.
Okay. Well, I guess again, I think the high entry network corridors are sort of tiered in a way. I would think that there may be other factors besides just design speed as to why there may be traffic crashes and fatalities. And maybe that's something to look at, where the traffic crashes and fatalities are.
All focus on action. So rather than just saying, hey, these are the problems, it's like, hey, these are all of the action. So here's an action that we can take. Have all of our roads have AWS? Or do all of our intersections have AWS? That's the 0 to 100%. Like, have we taken those actions? Here, have we taken the actions on higher entry networks? Not just saying, hey, like these are where the problems are, but it's like, have we done the actions? That's why I think this is such a big deal, because we can move the needle on this number every time we actually reduce the design speed of a road on the higher entry network to something that's survivable. Then that is progress towards a safer, more equitable, and more accessible road network.
I guess I will say, when we make changes to roads, we do look at what it will do to speed. But I guess I'm still at a loss of why just looking at, okay, here where the traffic crashes and fatalities happen, what's going on with this road? Have we done any sort of treatment on this road? And
so far, we don't know. Like, so we have this high injury network. It's basically saying, hey, these are our problems, but we have no idea. Like, we could probably look and see, okay, these are all like places where people are getting killed or injured. What can we do to fix them? And we know that speed is the number one thing that actually affects survivability rate. So like, how do we reduce speed on these roads, and are we doing those things to reduce speed? That's why.
Okay. But I guess we're still going back and forth with what type of data would help you do that. Like, we do have data on whether we're doing curb extensions or signals or LPIs or protected bike lanes or bus priority, ATE cameras.
So whether or not we do those, so basically at the end of the day, all of that is like, so there's one variable that matters for survivability, and that's speed. So are we reducing speed? We can reduce speed in a bunch of different ways. You can reduce design speed in a bunch of different ways. You can do any of those things, curb extensions or raised crosswalks or protected bike lanes, or even protected bus lanes. Like, these are all things that would reduce speed. That's great. But at the end of the day, that's what we care about, is like making sure that people with disabilities are not faced with a road network that will kill them because they're not in a car.
Right.
And so that's kind of why this design speed. Another option here is kind of looking at actual speed data, or 85th percentile data. If it's easier to get, hey, like, what are the speeds at the evening, in the morning, afternoon, and evening of these roads, and are they exceeding the posted speed limit? Are they exceeding the 20 mile an hour or 25 mile an hour survivability thresholds? So that's something that we can explore. But basically, is just like, hey, we already know where the high injury networks are. It's just, hey, what are these high injury network corridor roads actually designed to let someone do.
But I guess so we're not going back and forth with this. I think the one thing is we don't have the data on the design speeds. If we're looking at speed during a certain given point in time, that would involve like a traffic study, or if the MAAC wants to contract with someone to collect that data, that's possible.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So do we have any speed data on any of these roads?
I would have to go back and look.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's worth asking.
And we'll even going back to look, speed changes, we've made changes, it may not be up to date. So I guess if we're doing a report card, it just.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of the best. So like, we'll kind of take the best data we can get and use it to the best of our ability. So another metric is intersections that allow left turns permissibly. So that means basically allowing left turns while there's a walk signal that is active. So when we say data doesn't exist, like, we don't know where where different signals are in the district.
No, we know where the signals are, but I think with the issue with permissive left turns is that it may not be the signalized intersection, is how I understand that.
So it's just so like, let's take a random intersection. Like, I've got 4th and G is right out. 4th and G Southwest is outside of my house. So that, like, do we not know that there's not a protected left turn signal there?
I think there are two different issues. You could turn left on some intersections where there aren't signals. And so the way this is written, it's not just saying at signalized intersections.
Oh yeah, we can
definitely where we have protected left turns.
Yeah, that sounds great. So basically, we can change this and say percent of intersections allowing percent of signalized intersections that allow a left turn without a protected left arrow.
That may be possible.
Okay, perfect. That's great. And then lastly, so the emergency evacuation route, this data doesn't exist. Is it because we don't know where the emergency evacuation routes are?
And maybe that shouldn't say this doesn't exist. We know where the emergency evacuation routes are. We know there's a small sliver of a bus lane in Columbia Heights that's 24/7. But that's about it. And I think the issue that some folks had with this metric in particular is that even if there were, let's say, a natural disaster or a September 11th, the traffic patterns won't look like they do now. Like, even the bus priority lanes may not be just for buses only. Parking lanes are no longer for parking in emergency. I think there was an issue, especially with that narrative. But should there be a plan for persons with disabilities if there is a disaster? Yes.
So yeah, is there one? I don't know. I don't know. I couldn't find one.
Yeah, I would say it's not necessarily us that's leading it. It would be HCMA or the Office of Disability Rights. And I can reach out to them.
Got it.
My
So
understanding is it's HCMA, but I don't have a contact there.
Okay.
yeah. So does DDOT have anyone that works on emergency evacuation routes?
We do. I think just in this context, like others would take the lead.
Got it. Yeah. So especially so basically like I'm just kind of thinking practically of like if you don't have a car and you're disabled, like the bus is the only kind of mobility option you have. And that's kind of why I'm particularly kind of focused on this is that like, hey, if we don't have a way for people to get out, that's like really bad.
No, I understand, but I think we've also got to recognize if the Metro Rail system is down, our bus is picking up at the normal schedule. Because I understand what you're saying. I was here during the earthquake in 2011. People had to walk. But then that gets to the point of, do we have sidewalks? Do we have sidewalks repaired? Would that be a better metric?
Yeah, yeah. So I did find a DDOT study. I called the author like 16 years ago. They did something and basically said, hey, the sidewalks are like nowhere near adequate for people. Even we have what are called walkout routes, and they have nowhere near the capacity we need. So basically, kind of the nightmare scenario is where we just have like car clogged. We just have like bumper to bumper cars, and the only people who are left behind are people who don't have cars, or and even worse, people with disabilities without cars. And that's where it's just like, hey, what are we doing to make sure that they can get a bus out of here?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the thought. But yeah, so these are five. I can make this change to make this kind of more specific. And I don't know. So on the kind of design speed, less than or equal to 20 miles an hour. If we can go back and figure out, hey, like, is there any data that we can use on actual speed if they don't have the actual design speed? That would be great. I think there's also a way to back this number out based on the lane widths and the number of lanes. I think there's like an engineering standard for this, but we could do this. But I think it would be more direct if we just get it like actually like get the number that's being plugged into the kind of the traffic engineer's model.
Right. And I will say it's probably based on the width of the road. And if we're looking at roads like New York Avenue or Massachusetts or Florida and doing some heavy lifts to change it, because I understand speed definitely is a factor. To put that on a report card, and we're not making those drastic changes, I guess, and
why not? I mean, we have a drastic problem.
Right. And I guess changing those road speeds to 20 miles per hour, if that's what the public wants to do, we can do it. But I guess coming out of this group and putting it on a scorecard, it just doesn't make any sense. Again, those unintended consequences of like taking those major arterial roads and having all of that traffic diverted to somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully sustainable DC, our goal, like as a district, is 25% of private of trips are done by vehicle. If we achieve that goal, which we've set out as a district, that would mean a substantial reduction in single occupancy vehicles. So hopefully that those if we kind of do what we say we're going to do, we're going to have a lot fewer cars on the road.
Right. And I guess just going back to that 20 miles per hour design speed, it is bigger than just this group, and even within DDOT, right? Like massive changes to roads, and it may be more than just restriping. To get to that would require a lot of buy-in.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just, like, as you know,
And if that's the goal, that's the goal. We should just make that a principle and not necessarily a report card. We should just say we want.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, like kind of the goal. So the reason that I got involved with the MAAC is basically to say, hey, like, our road network is dangerous for people with disabilities like me, and I want a safer and more accessible and more equitable road network. And first and foremost, I don't want to die on our streets, and the can we reduce speed on the roads that we've already identified as there's nothing more important than just being able to go from one place to another without getting killed or hurt. And that's why I kind of, there's kind of one world in which kind of we say, oh, this is like, we can make, we're allowed to make these small changes, but then there's another world of just saying, hey, let's start from scratch and just say we don't want to die.
And I guess my issue is only if that's what we want to do, that should just be a principle and not necessarily some sort of data point. Like we should just
well,
say,
I guess it's a report card in the sense that we can actually measure our progress. Like, so we've identified our most dangerous roads. Are we doing what we need to do to decrease the most dangerous behavior on the most dangerous roads? Are we doing the things that we need to do?
And I guess, like I've said too, there are a number of safety treatments that we are doing to those roads that we've identified.
So that's great, but it's like, at the end of the day, like, are we reducing the most dangerous? So, we don't know if those safety treatments are the right ones. We know that the ones that are right are the ones that ultimately reduce speed. And we know that there's a threshold, like there's a survivability drop off after you get to 20%, after you get to 20 miles an hour. Like, it's significantly, you start to really see a ramp up in really starting to see a ramp up in death past 20 miles an hour. So, again, like, how do we get our the most dangerous behavior on our most dangerous streets? How do we rein that in? So then basically, are we doing that or not? Like, and that's where it's just like, okay, great. Like, we're going from, maybe we had 80%, 80% is, where we are, and we want to get to 85% or 90%, or hopefully we're getting to an A, where 90% of our roads are not designed so that people die when they get hit.
Right. And I think we've covered it. I'll just say, nothing is perfect, right? We're not a perfect agency or entity. But again, just going back to the scorecard, this particular data set and point, we don't have.
Yeah. So maybe we can go. So we're specifically looking at speed. So what we do is we look for speed data. I mean, worst case, we could have people just like, we can kind of rent, radar devices and measure speed, and we can just get a bunch of interns to do that. I prefer not to do that, because I think we have better ways of measuring speed. But I think, yeah, so if we can explore what speed data we have on our high entry network, that would be great.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other thoughts from folks, kind of on the metrics themselves? Kelly, Buddy,
interesting conversation. I'm just listening.
Yeah, I think it's really come along. I really like the idea of looking at the left turn problem in particular, because I think that's definitely affects disabled pedestrians a lot. So I think that's like really great targeting, and the others I think would be really helpful too. So great progress.
Cool. yeah, and we can keep. I mean, we could keep refining this. You know, I've gotten some good feedback. Yeah, gotten some good feedback, and I'm kind of sending this around to other folks too, and we can keep refining this. And yeah, I think we're kind of converging on some good ones. Cool. Any other thoughts on? Oh, other thoughts, kind of big picture on the scorecard or the report card, and kind of, yeah, we can continue making progress on this, and kind of I'll take a return and kind of share what I got next month. One thing I did want to ask, so we right now using not they're using my Howard email, or my Howard email for this Zoom session. I would prefer not to. But I would prefer to actually use MAAC account for this. One thing that I found is easier to manage Google Meet rather than Zoom. And I wanted to kind of get a sense of whether people had a strong opinion. Is there anybody here that cannot use Google Meet? Turns out it's a little bit easier to manage, both on the recording side and the transcription, and it's also significantly cheaper. But if there's anyone who has a strong opinion, I definitely would love to hear them talk about that.
You're breaking up, Karthik.
I basically was just saying, it turns out that it's a lot cheaper and easier to use Google Meet rather than the Zoom platform for video. And I wanted to see how folks felt about that.
Would it be the same process, and what would be?
It's exactly the same process. It's instead of clicking, when you click, you'd actually even use the same link, macdc.link/meeting, but instead of Zoom popping up, it would be Google Meet that popped up.
Okay, sure.
Cool. Any other folks, and kind of Kelly, any kind of strong, any opinion?
Either works for me. I'm a big fan of Google Meet.
Okay, cool, awesome. And actually, then the last small thing that I wanted to share is just a quick update on our finances. So we have $10,000 total, and basically one of the things that I would like to spend that on are one, Google Meet, and Google actually also gives us the ability to Google Meet gives us the ability to record meetings, and also gives us a phone number we can use. People leave voicemails about, and they can leave a voicemail saying, "Hey, I'm encountering this accessibility issue." So that's, I think that is pretty cool. I'm kind of excited about that. But I want to show you all this here. This is probably it. Yes, this is it. Okay, so these are some of the expenses that I want to kind of run through. One, the Google Workspace 1 year is $144. Rebrandly is the system that allows us to use macdc.link and get people to any site that we want. So for example, if I go to macdc.link/data request underscore v2, I think that's what it says, that link to this, instead of this kind of long, ugly URL. I don't know if you can see this, but drop that google.com, this this long, ugly URL. You can just use macdc.link. So we can use that for meeting links, and also to share documents, or to basically to give people nice URLs to go to. And MAACDC.org, we can point people to MAACDC.org as well, kind of specific links easily. Oh yeah, just I want to highlight here, please, like, you know, anyone who's interested in this stuff, please encourage them to apply to the MAAC. You see that as a link on MAACDC.org. Then another thing, that's Rambling, and then HubSpot. HubSpot for a year is $254. That allows us to host MAACDC.org. Right now, MAACDC.org is hosted on my Howard University HubSpot account. I would really like that to not be the case. Actually, MAACDC have its own HubSpot account, and that's where I would like to send somebody here. And would love to have virtual cards. I know Jira has reached out to you, buddy, and I know you're planning on rolling off, which I wish I could even see that too. But the virtual cards and our administrative assistant, Jira, who's awesome, but unfortunately has gotten busy with school. So just paying her he earns $3 an hour, and hoping that that will become Neha as well once, so kind of going forward. And those are the kind of main things that we've spent money on so far. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of give an update and then just kind of ask if anyone had any questions, comments, concerns about our spending. That would be great.
Okay.
No questions.
Oh, no
We
questions.
we could all go to Hawaii. But yeah, so I think we're going to come in well under our $10,000 budget, and that will get reset by the end of September. So it will reset at $10,000. So yeah, I mean, I think, you know, for foreseeable future, like these are the kind of small expense. Those were year-long expenses too. So I think, you know, I think we're good if we want to do. Maybe this allows us to do some data collection if we need it. But yeah, I mean, and so kind of that so far that's what we've spent on. Any kind of questions, comments, concerns before we break? Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for a great meeting. We'll meet again next on the second week of, or the second Wednesday of next month. You can find the next meetings by going to maacdc.org/about us and then meetings. So our next meeting is on October 11th, 2023. At 5:30 p.m. We'll use the Google Meet platform, but it's the same link. You can use maacdc.link/meeting the same way that you get here. And yeah, looking forward to another great meeting. Thanks so much, everyone, for your contribution.
Okay, thank you all. Take care.
Great. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.
Oh, I didn't ask Emily to. Kelly didn't give out her report. Dang. I'll ask Kelly next time. Okay.